will be posted on YouTube and linked on our website for those who were not able to join us today, or for those who would like to watch it again. It will be posted possibly as soon as tomorrow.
Si necesita ayuda en español, por favor envíe un correo electrónico studentassignment@wcpss.net y alguien se comunicará con usted mañana.
This evening's session will explore the possibility of a school calendar change from multi-track year-round to single-track or traditional starting in 2028-29. The schools that we'll be discussing are Holly Grove Elementary, Holly Grove Middle, Holly Springs Elementary, and Rex Road Elementary. As a reminder, this session was prepared by the Long Range Planning Department and the Office of Student Assignment. The information we will review with you this evening is a subset of the full presentation that was shared with the board during their facilities committee meeting on March 10th. Again, this evening's session will focus on gathering feedback related to Holly Grove Elementary, Holly Grove Middle, Holly Springs Elementary, and Rex Road Elementary. Before we begin, let me go over some logistics. Our session will last for no more than an hour and a half. We will begin with a presentation and conclude by responding to questions from today's session. We recognize that now and throughout the session, you may have questions about the process or the possibility of a calendar change for your school. To capture your questions, we'll be using the Q&A feature within Google Meet. To access this feature from a computer, please click on the grid shape in the toolbar on your screen. If you are using a mobile device, select the three dots first, then select the icon with the three shapes. You should then see a Q&A feature identified by a question mark icon. To ensure your questions are anonymous, our moderators will be monitoring the Q&A for the questions and capturing them throughout this evening's session. Once you see that your question has been removed from the Q&A, that means that your question has been successfully captured by our moderators. You do not need to resubmit your question. We will make every effort to respond to your questions toward the end of the session. In addition, we will use your questions to update the FAQ portion of our website.
Si necesita ayuda en español, por favor envíe un correo electrónico a studentassignment@wcpss.net y alguien se comunicará con usted mañana.
Thank you, Susan. In addition, we are asking that you contribute to the larger community discussion related to this initial discussion on calendar changes via Thought Exchange. The Thought Exchange will remain open through April 5th. After it closes, we will summarize the feedback received and share the summary with the board during their facilities committee meeting on April 14th. No one will be personally identified in the summary. Before I turn things over to Susan, I would like to remind you that today's session will focus on Holly Grove Elementary, Holly Grove Middle, Holly Springs Elementary, and Rex Road Elementary. By the end of this evening's session, you will have had an opportunity to briefly review the process for recommending calendar changes, extensively review the schools in your area that may benefit from a calendar change, quickly review the timeline for the planning process, and perhaps most importantly, submit your questions that will help you and our planning team gain a better understanding of the potential impacts of a school calendar change for your family. And now I will turn things over to Susan Pulliam.
Thank you, Melissa, for welcoming all of us. And I see a handful of principals have joined us as well. So I'm glad to see that you're here listening to the conversation as well. So thank you for joining us. As a quick reminder and to provide some context, on March 10th, our staff shared an initial discussion about the concept of a potential calendar change with our facilities committee of the Board of Education. The discussion centered on possible recommendations for the 2028-2029 school year. So nothing immediate, it's still a couple of years off. And again, to clarify, no specific recommendations have been made at this time. We are still in the gathering input and feedback stage. We're working to get information not only from families, but from schools and from staff. And we're just trying to determine which schools may benefit from a potential calendar change. All of the information we're going to share with you this evening, along with other tools about our overall planning process, can be found in these two areas. The WCPSS.net assignment planning website, it lists all of the 6 steps that we're going to review tonight about the entire planning process that we use to manage enrollment and enrollment growth throughout the county. In addition, this particular page on calendar conversions, which you can also access from step 6 of the site above, is a direct link to all of the information just about this particular discussion and conversation. So we encourage you to bookmark those and visit them regularly throughout this process so that you can review all the updated information and even see the updated FAQs that are created based on sessions like tonight's. We recognize that some of you may just now be joining us and want to remind you that in order to capture questions, we're going to use the Q&A tool here in the Google Meet. So if you have a question right now, you're welcome to go ahead and post it. If you're using a computer, you're going to look for this grid shape on the bottom of your toolbar, and then you're going to look for the question mark icon. If you're looking using a mobile device, you'll first look for the 3 dots, then you'll look for 3 shapes, then you'll see that cute question mark for the Q&A. Go ahead and post your questions there at any point throughout tonight's discussion. Our moderators will be actively monitoring that tool. If you see that your question has been removed from the chat, that lets you know that our moderators have successfully captured that question, and we'll address it later in tonight's session. In addition, to ensure that your questions are anonymous, we're going to make sure that we're using this tool properly so that you can ask any question that you'd like without that losing your anonymity. In addition, just a quick reminder that we have a thought exchange that's ongoing. You can access it by using this QR code or going to tejoin.com and typing in the code you see here. We'll keep this open through April 5th. Once it is complete, we will share a summary of the results with the board, along with any recommendations that we're going to make about calendar changes during their facilities committee meeting on April the 14th. And we'll show you that timeline later as well. So to get started, let's just review have a better understanding of how schools in your area were identified and how they even ended up on this list for possible consideration. So first, just a general reminder that we follow a 6-step annual planning cycle. You'll see that this involves many components that you might see discreetly, maybe even in the news, or if you watch various committee meetings. We start with an annual forecast. The original forecast that kicked off this process was done in February of 25. We have since revised that forecast. We do it annually. We've already released one just recently in March of 2026. We then look at our projected crowding for the next year. We look at the capital improvement plan. That includes new schools, renovations, anything that might change the capacity somewhere in the region or somewhere in your area. And then we release our annual enrollment plan. And so some of you may have been impacted by that, particularly those of you that are attending Rex Road Elementary. You'll know that you were part of this process just a year ago for the 25-26 planning cycle. Once that annual enrollment plan is complete, then we look and see, are there any crowded schools that need additional support that couldn't be provided from the annual enrollment plan? And we discuss and review our CAP schools in the region. And then following that last step, we look to see, are there any other utilization concerns throughout the district that maybe could use some other type of support that didn't include maybe a reassignment or capping. And that's where we are now. We're at the very last step of the 26-27 cycle. And so that's where we are. We're finishing up that 26-27 planning cycle. We initially start that process by looking at the CAP schools list to see if there's anything that we can do to support these schools. Maybe we need to take a capped traditional school and recommend it go multi-track year-round to support the growth in the region. Or in your case, maybe we have a slightly under-enrolled school that's operating on a multi-track year-round that perhaps could benefit from going either traditional or single track to just improve the efficiency of that school. Just to quickly run through those 6 steps before we get to our specific recommendations for this area, here you can see the updated annual forecast. This is actually the forecast that was released in March of this year that is we're going to use to consider changes for our 27, 28, and beyond enrollment plan cycles. So you can see that in previous years, we were showing some really rapid growth rates. We're having a little bit more of a modest approach now going into the future. We're still going to have growth in our district. It might be distributed differently. It just won't be nearly as quick a rate as it has been historically. Here you can see a spatial distribution. So knowing how many students we need to serve in a coming school year or across the next 10 years is important. However, knowing where that growth is going to come is really critical. And as you can see, we still have some areas with what we call the blue arrows, the blue up arrows, that are seeing some growth. And you're not immune. There's a little portion here, Holly Springs, kind of going towards the Apex Way, that's still showing some growth. And then there's lots of regions throughout the county that are showing what we call stabilization. So the little tiny red arrows that are going down show that we have people maybe that are aging in place. Perhaps the residential development in these areas has completed for the most part, relatively built out. And now we're kind of waiting for what we sometimes call that churn. As families get older, maybe move out of their homes, a younger family moves in and brings in children. And it's a little bit more of a gradual growth or even just sort of flat rate of enrollment. So it doesn't necessarily mean that we're losing enrollment. It just means that growth in these areas is slowing as compared to what we historically had seen. So if we look at the comparison, the visual that you see here on the left represents the forecast that was presented in February of 25. You can see there's been a slight adjustment, maybe not as much growth throughout the district. However, you can still see that concentrated growth is kind of on these outer edges, sort of outside of 540, if you will. The next step in the process, as I mentioned, was then to let's just look at next year. So looking at next year's projected crowding, we're seeing at the elementary, middle, and high school level, how crowded we think our schools are going to be based on just next year's enrollment, just as sort of an initial snapshot. The image that you see here on the left represents elementary schools. This one represents middle schools, and this one represents high schools. We'll look at these in greater detail for your region in a few moments. Here you also then see that the third step in the process is to look at the capital improvement plan. Right now, the board is still considering what to approve for the next year of the capital improvement plan. Right now, there's a proposal that Little Creek Elementary be added, in out years as a new elementary school, and some more projects be added for renovations. So the top map represents what is the current approved capital improvement plan for new school construction. Again, some of you can see your school Rex Road here. And then the lower map represents schools that are currently undergoing or are preparing to undergo a renovation. And then we jump into that enrollment plan that already is complete for the 26-27 school year. We're now actually starting up our public engagement for the 27-28 cycle. As I mentioned, we also will start looking at CAP schools. Once last year's plan was approved in November, we immediately started looking at our schools that might be overly crowded going into the 26-27 school year. You'll see here highlighted in green the 2 schools in your region that are still showing as capped. As a reminder, and I'm sure this region knows this very well because you just had a school come off of the CAP list, the capping just means that there's a total maximum number of students that can be served at the school. Once enrollment hits that number, and in the elementary, particularly by grade level, the next new family that moves in would potentially be sent to an overflow school, a somewhat nearby school that comes with district transportation so the student can still be served in their area, but they may not be able to attend Holly Ridge or they may not be able to attend Oakview. Currently, we ask you to always, if you're moving into this region, check with the school because it's quite possible they're not capping yet, and more importantly, they might not be capping at your particular student's grade level. So it's always best to call the school first. So we completed that process, and now we're moving into the public engagement related to schools that operate on a year-round calendar, but maybe don't have long-term crowding concerns that would warrant keeping them on the multi-track year-round calendar. Again, if you're just joining us and you haven't seen this notice before, we're going to use the Q&A feature here in the Google Meet to capture your questions. So please go ahead and drop those in. If you've got a burning question you had as you came into the session, go ahead and use this tool to type that question in. We're going to make sure your questions are posted anonymously. So when you see that your question has been removed from the Q&A tool, that lets you know our moderators have successfully captured it and we'll address it later in our session. And I know I'm talking a little quick, but I want to get to that question and answer period as fast as we possibly can. Here, I just want to do a quick review. I mentioned earlier what it means to be a CAP school. A CAP school is a school whose enrollment is restricted. The board has actually approved a total number of which the school should not exceed because of the capacity concerns at that particular campus based on that high level of enrollment. Most of these we find in our high growth areas as rapid enrollment comes into a school more quickly than perhaps we can build a new school, let's say. New students moving into the area generally are sent to an overflow school. A crowded school is a little bit different. This one might be closed to transfer. That's a term some of you might be familiar with. It means that the school is serving more students than the facility is designed to support. However, anyone who moves into the base attendance area can still enroll and be served at that school. They're not sent to an overflow school. But as a district, we might restrict the number of transfers that can go into the school. We might, be thinking along those lines, and we might be encouraging families from this area to make magnet choices or something like that. But we have not gotten to the point yet where a new family would be sent to a different school. It's just crowded. It isn't. And then an underutilized school is a school that has room to grow. And it could be because it's in an area that's high growth and it's waiting for that growth to come. And it could be that it's a school in an area that's kind of aging out and stabilizing, and maybe that peak of enrollment has passed and we're entering into a new era for the school where there's just room for additional students. The concern here is that a school may be operating below 85% in this sort of bucket, and it could potentially affect the academic programs for the school. It may make it difficult for principals to hire appropriate staff to be able to serve all the students in the school. So we do always want to monitor these schools to make sure we're providing the support necessary. Couple of things to keep in mind, particularly at the elementary level, class size legislation dictates how many students can be served in a particular classroom or with a student to teacher ratio at kindergarten, first, second, and third. In addition, keep in mind that some areas do have projected enrollment growth. And so maybe there are some things to take into consideration when we have a school that's underutilized, but there's enrollment growth coming in the future. There's other capacity restrictions. Some of them are specific to elementary school, like kindergarten and first grade students need to have that sort of first floor egress for safety purposes. It could be that we need to make sure we have the appropriate program space available for the programs that need to serve the students in that particular school. We could be seeing co-teaching. Some of you may have experienced this when some of your area schools were capped or overcrowded, where there might be 2 teachers in one classroom so that we can get that ratio of students down a little bit because there weren't enough classrooms to open up a whole nother section. And then, of course, core facility impacts. You may be familiar with these. Having really lots of lunches, because you've got to start lunch so early to make sure all the students can cycle through the lunch cycle. You might have really long carpool lines, long waits for the restroom for students. So just those types of core capacity concerns that might be impacting the school's ability to really operate at its best efficiency level. So what can we do? If we have an underutilized school, there's a handful of tools in our toolkit. We can adjust the boundaries of the school, try to add to the attendance area of the school. We could look at whether or not that school would be eligible for some choice support. Maybe students could transfer into the school. Maybe if it's a magnet school, we could increase, magnet seating of students at the school. And then in the case for today's conversation, we're really looking at this reducing capacity by taking the multi-track round calendar down to a single track or traditional calendar. So we're going to have more conversations about this, but there's a lot of tools in the toolkit. And so just to kind of walk you through how we got to this list. The first thing we did is we looked at all of the schools and we started to look for projected growth. Some schools on this list do have projected growth in their attendance area, so we'll talk about that when we get to your specific list of schools. But we look at that. And so if there was sufficient projected growth coming in the next year or two, we might say, let's leave that school for a year or two and let's keep monitoring it and see if that growth doesn't fill up the school and take better, use of that facility by filling up the seats. Are there schools nearby that are overcrowded or capped that could use some relief? Should we maybe look at adjusting the boundaries of the school? Are there mobile units on any of these campuses where perhaps removing those mobile units would really help to improve the efficiency of the school and obviously, improve safety and all those other types of concerns that we have as parents when we're thinking about how we use trailers on campuses. And then calendar optimization. So again, calendar optimization is kind of what's brought us all together tonight, is talking about whether or not a multi-track year-round school is necessary anymore. Do we need to keep operating all 4 tracks, or could we look at reducing to a single track, or even, converting back to the original calendar of traditional? Program adjustments are things that the district it's kind of new for us. In extreme cases in other districts, you might hear of them closing schools. That is not us. We are not there. That is not what we're experiencing. But perhaps we look at a school and determine that it could serve the district a better way if it was organized a little differently. So that is not part of tonight's discussion, but just know we think of all of the potential ways that we could help support a school that's operating under 85% consistently to try to help it get, more full, to be more efficient. And then looking at all of those options, we do recognize, and we just want to be candid and open and honest. We know that y'all love your multi-track year-round schools, and that you probably would prefer that we leave them as they are. And we get that. We understand that. And we understand that you've built your family schedules around that, and your track out camps and all of that. So that's also part of why the board has asked us to make sure that any discussion about a calendar change happens so far in advance of the actual change. So again, anything we're talking about tonight, the earliest anything could happen would be the 2028-29 school year. And again, no specific recommendation has been made just yet. But we want to be open and honest. We get that changing the calendar of a school perhaps is more disruptive than some of the other tools we could use to support an under-enrolled school. So we really don't want to enter into this discussion lightly, and we don't want to enter into it too early in the process. We really want to try to rule out those other options that I discussed before we get to the point where we say, you know what, I really think this is all that's left for us to do to support this school, is to get everybody on the same track so the school can operate more efficiently and the principal can staff appropriately, student programming can be made available, we can make sure we have balanced enrollment in our math classes, all those types of things that really improve student experiences at schools. So a couple of things just to think about when we're talking about reducing the tracks at a multi-track year-round school. A couple of options we've used as a district before. One would be to reduce to just a single track. It's typically track 4. And that then we just need to think about, if we do that, that's going to require families and staff to adjust their family calendars. So that's a big change. It will require some staff to evaluate if their salary might change. Some staff, because of the way that multi-track year-round schools work, could actually be getting 12 months of employment because they're serving all 4 tracks. Think of your specialists, like music teachers, art teachers sometimes are in this situation. So if we change the calendar of the school, that might change how many months of employment they'll be, contracted for. So that's something to be considerate of. The benefit of the track 4 is that if the school is in an area that maybe isn't growing right now, but has projected future growth, we're already in track 4. So if we need to expand to all 4 tracks again in the future, the structure and the infrastructure is already in place, and we can go ahead and just add those tracks in. If you're familiar with the Wendell area, Lake Myra Elementary is getting ready to go through that process. It opened as a multi-track year-round school. It took a while for the enrollment to build up and fill the school, so the school was brought down to a single track 4. If you'll know the Wendell Falls community, it's in that area. As Wendell Falls continued to grow and continue to bring in students, that school now has become very, very full. So going into the 26-27 school year, it will add in the remaining tracks and become a full multi-track year-round school. That way, all the students can stay assigned to that same school, but all 4 tracks will be used. So that's a way of saying that's how that sort of model would work. When we look at whether or not a multi-track year-round school should convert to traditional, there's those 2 main factors are still in play, that families and staff members have to really adjust their calendars, and that salary component for some of the staff at the year-round school is something to be considered. But I will say that historically, I'm not going to say it could never happen, but historically, if a school goes from multi-track to traditional, it tends to stay traditional and not be considered for potential growth. So we just need to keep all of that in mind when we're thinking about what these long-term recommendations might be. So let's go ahead and talk about the schools that may possibly, perhaps, by chance, benefit from a calendar change. Again, we've not made any recommendations. We're just now in the gathering feedback phase so that the planning team can feel good about making solid recommendations to the board. All right, so here is the by the numbers. For the 4 schools in this area, Holly Grove Elementary is currently operating at 87% crowding on a multi-track year-round calendar, which includes the use of its trailers. You'll notice that without the trailers, it would only be at 93.4%. The other thing to keep in mind is that it has a historical 5-year trend of decreasing enrollment by close to 17%. The large majority of this is due to the opening of Rex Road because it took a big significant portion of the attendance area of the school. Holly Grove Middle is currently no trailers on its campus, and it's currently operating around 61% for the current school year. So again, plenty of room to grow in this school. However, you'll notice that it's had a sharp decline. This decline is specifically related to the opening of Herbert Akins Road Middle. When that school opened up, it significantly reduced the enrollment at Holly Grove Middle. So it's not just that the neighborhoods are changing, it's also that the assignment pattern for this school changed. Holly Springs Elementary also has some trailers on its campus. It's currently operating at 74%. If it had to squeeze in the building, it would be overcrowded this year. However, yet again, we see a drop in enrollment again because of some domino reassignments that happened in this area related to the opening of schools like Rex Road and Bowling Road. So those of you in this area that were participating in our enrollment planning sessions last year, you might have a feel for what happened here. But if you have questions about that, by all means, post those. So we'll jump ahead then. So again, let's look at that projected enrollment growth, but let's zoom into your area. The school campuses that we're talking about are roughly at the ends of these arrows. So this is sort of your Holly Groves. I'm sorry, that's your Holly Springs Elementary. These are your Holly Grove campuses. And then this is roughly where Rex Road is. It's not precise, but it's close. And you can see that while there is growth north of the schools, it's really stabilizing around the schools. Rex is in a potential high growth area. However, growth has slowed in the last couple of years, but it does have quite a bit of developable land in its attendance area. So that's also something we need just to be thinking about for Rex Road. When we look at the current crowding going into next school year, kind of matching that up, you'll see that the Holly Springs, you can see the gray basically means that the schools are projected to be operating less than 90%. And so there's several schools even kind of coming off into the area over here. A couple of these are new schools. So right, Woods Creek is new. Rex Road is new. Bowling Road, which is a little bit off the map, is new. So it's intentional that these schools are a little bit under enrolled because we're waiting for the rest of the population to join the school as the 4th and 5th graders age out and the new families in the area and the new developments start to fill the school. But there's sufficient capacity in the region, particularly across these 3 school campuses. So just something to think about. You do see that Oakview is still projected to be crowded. Buckhorn has been significantly reduced based with the opening of both Bowling Road and Rex. So it's comfortably in its building now. Lincoln Heights as a magnet school is also dealing with some stability transfers. So we project that enrollment will balance out as Bowling Road continues to take some of the students from that area. Again, we can answer any questions about this that you have as we go along. So let's just look at this school by school. So Holly Grove, over the last few years, we've showed you that projected enrollment change, or that enrollment change back in 2022, 23, it was operating a little over 104%. This sort of stabilized because the school has been capped. So the enrollment was capped and we tried to keep the enrollment, within that cap value. And then you've seen with the opening of the new school, the enrollment reduced quite significantly with Rex Road opening, and it's projected to continue to reduce as those stability transfers in the 4th and 5th grade age out of the school over time. When we look at Holly Springs Elementary, again, very full back in the 22, 23, 23, 24 school years. We had some reassignments in 24, 25 that helped to relieve the school, and additional reassignments in 25, 26 that relieved the school. So the school is now projected to continue to decrease just a little bit so that it would be able to sufficiently support all of its students on a single track or traditional calendar. When we look at the schools as compared to the other schools in the region that I mentioned, you'll notice that only one school is still showing a little overcrowded, and that's Oakview, but they have started to level off as their area starts to age in place. So the crowding that we have seen at that school historically is starting to level off a little bit. Holly Ridge is not experiencing any significant crowding. Again, this is the projected values for 26, 27. But you'll see that there is sufficient capacity in the region. If we take all of the trailers out of the region, it might get a little bit tight, but we could start looking at whether or not it's time to remove those trailers, or should we leave the trailers in place and keep the schools on maybe a single track or a traditional calendar. Just something to consider across all of the schools in the area at the elementary level. Individually, for Holly Grove, there have been recent reassignments. I mentioned that reduced the attendance boundary for the school. It does host 3 mobile classrooms. Right now, they're currently not using those classrooms. There's no significant enrollment projected in its remaining base attendance area. The students at this school do feed to Holly Grove Middle, so we would need to be considerate of the fact that they're not only feeding to Holly Grove Middle, but they're on the same campus as Holly Grove Middle. And so does that impact the relationship between these 2 schools? Should we look at calendars for both of the schools at the same time? Should they match? Is it okay if one is traditional and one isn't? We think we know the answer to that, but it's definitely something we want to tease out with your feedback tonight and through the thought exchange. But we do need to think about the impacts to track loading at the middle school if we were to change the track configurations at Holly Grove Elementary. And because of those recent reassignments, there are students on stability transfers at Holly Grove Elementary that will slowly age out over the next couple of years, that will continue to reduce the pressure or need for extra seats at the school. For Holly Springs Elementary, similarly, they didn't have assignment changes that went to new schools, but they did have those domino impacts in the area because of the opening of the new schools. So their attendance boundary has been significantly reduced. They do host 14 mobile classrooms, some of which they are using, so we would need to consider the impacts on mobile classroom use. There is not significant enrollment growth projected in the remaining base attendance area for the next several years. And the base students at this school do feed into Holly Ridge Middle. I believe some students choose to apply for a year-round middle school, and it might be Lufkin or Holly Grove. So those are things to consider. But the base students that are following their base attendance pattern would go to Holly Ridge Middle, which is a traditional calendar school. So let's just keep that in the back of your mind. And again, similar to Holly Grove, those stability transfers will continue to age out, so the enrollment will continue to stabilize over the next couple of years. For Rex Road Elementary, it is a brand new school that opened this school year. So it's its first year in operations. It's working really hard to offer all 4 tracks, particularly in the lower grades. I know for sure in 4th and 5th grade, we had to make the decision to just go with maybe tracks 1 and 4 because of all of the students that elected to stay at their previous school. But I recognize that this school is not fully loaded, and some of that's intentional because it's a new school, but some of it's also because the development patterns in the area have slowed just a little bit. So there's not as many new students coming in as were originally projected when the school was first considered and constructed. There are no mobile units on the campus, so there's nothing to reduce there. It does have sufficient capacity to absorb the projected enrollment growth through 2035 with a track 4 or traditional calendar. So it's something to keep in mind. It could support that growth on one of those calendars. The base students do currently feed into Holly Grove Middle. So again, we need to be considerate of that track alignment and that feeder pattern alignment. Although it's not on the same campus as Holly Grove Middle, that relationship is important for us to keep in mind as we think about what would be an appropriate consideration for this school. The other thing to think about is that since it just opened in 25-26, if it continues to operate as multi-track for 26-27 and 27-28 and makes a change for 28-29, that would be its 4th year of operations. That's sort of our unwritten rule that we try to follow, is to try not to impact a school any more frequently than every 3 years for these types of major changes. But that's just something to weigh and consider. Right now, the board has asked us to consider these recommendations for the 28-29 school year to give families and staff plenty of time to sort of prepare for any changes that might come. A question that's kind of been resonating in the planning team's mind is whether or not any of these changes could be expedited, perhaps start as early as the 27-28 school year. So something that maybe we could discuss with your questions later in this session. Looking at the projected crowding then at the middle school level, you can see what it looks like across the district. Generally speaking, we have a good amount of middle school seats as a district, but as you looked at that first map and even here you can see, but there's a handful of schools, Apex Friendship Middle and Mills Park Middle in particular, that are capped. So we need to figure out how to maybe realign some attendance areas in this region, or perhaps look at whether or not these traditional schools should go multi-track year round. Not a popular conversation either, right? So, but that's not today's conversation. But in this area, you can see that Lufkin is doing okay. It's right around 100% for next year. Holly Ridge Middle has sufficient capacity. Holly Grove has sufficient capacity. Herbert Akins is finally settling a little bit. And West Mill, because they were just growing. It looks like they're going to stabilize and be appropriately full. And then Westlake Middle is starting to grow a little bit at a projected utilization rate of 86%. I apologize. So let's look at the numbers for Holly Grove Middle. You can see it's been relatively stable because the major reassignment that impacted this school happened in the 21-22 school year, happened just outside this chart. So you'll notice that that change happened right here in 21-22. If that line was here, you would have seen that the enrollment would have been significantly higher, closer to that 1,500 mark. And then with the opening of Herbert Akins Road Middle, it significantly reduced the population at Holly Grove Middle. You can also see here the comparison to the other areas in chart form. This is similar to the graphic that I just showed you. None of the schools in this area are going to have trailers for the 26-27 school year. So I take that back. Holly Ridge does, but the other three do not. Westlake will be not using its trailers anymore very soon. So you can see that these crowding rates reflect the core facilities of the campus. So we feel that there's sufficient capacity in the region to absorb the growth if these schools were to perhaps go to a traditional or single track school, and in particular Holly Grove Middle. Holly Grove Middle considerations, similar to the elementary school, those recent reassignments that we talked about really reduce the attendance boundary for the school. It does not have any mobile units, so that's not a way for us to reduce the capacity of the school. Again, there's no significant enrollment growth projected through 2035 in its current attendance area. And there are base students from multiple schools that attend this school. There are base students from Buckhorn Creek, which is a traditional calendar elementary school, and they feed to this multi-track year-round middle. Holly Grove Elementary, as we've already mentioned, it's on the same campus. Lincoln Heights, there are some students from the Lincoln Heights attendance area that go to Holly Grove. So that's a traditional to a multi-track year round. And then Rex Road, which is currently multi-track. So all of these schools have portions of their basic, all of Holly Grove and all of Rex feed into Holly Grove Middle. And then the other three at least some portion of their attendance area feed into the school. We just also wanted to let you know that early in the adoption of multi-track year-round in the late 90s, early 2000s, there were a lot of conversations about why to use multi-track. As a district, one of our main drivers was to just increase the capacity of the school. When you add in that fourth track of students while the other students are tracked out, you're able to increase the capacity of the school by anywhere from 25 to 33%, depending on the design of the school. And so that just immediately gives us additional seats in an area, particularly one that's experiencing high growth, and particularly in an area where we have no other way to add capacity. Maybe we can't add trailers to the sites. Maybe it's just too expensive to get a new school up and running in that particular area. And so there's also some research that's been done over the last couple of years that show that there's really a negligible difference between the student outcomes at schools if they go to a multi-track or a traditional calendar school. So we do know that there are individual students and individual family reasons why a school that calendar might be better for your child or for your family situation, but just the overall statistics across all of the subgroups show that there's not a statistically significant difference in academic performance of students based solely on the calendar of the school that they attend. Both of these research articles are available on our Calendar Conversions website if you'd like to read them in greater detail, but we just wanted to share this with you so that you know that as a district, we really do use multi-track year-round elementary and middle school specifically to increase the capacity of the school in a way that doesn't require any construction costs or additional trailers. If we do not need that multi-track year-round anymore for capacity reasons, we do have the responsibility to at least evaluate and consider whether or not changing the calendar of the school to increase the efficiency of the school would be beneficial. All of the information I've shared with you up to now is available either on our assignment planning site or through the calendar conversion page. This is the most direct link to all the information just about this topic. But if you are interested in those projected enrollment growth, the capital improvement plan, those steps 1 through 5 that I talked about earlier, you'll want to jump to this page, and that'll give you links to all of that. Is it my turn to talk with you, Melissa?
Just about.
Okay.
Did we go through the timeline and next
I think
steps?
we need to do the timeline and next steps. So before we do the timeline and next steps, just to remind you, Melissa's going to rejoin us soon and help us go through all of the questions. And I've seen that little ticker go. So I believe we have quite a few questions to get to. And we're going to try to get to as many of them as we possibly can. So this is the way to post those questions. I think a lot of you found it because I've seen those questions popping in. So before we jump to the questions, just a real quick to let you know where we are in the process. So on March 10th, we presented the information to the facilities committee and updated our website. We then opened up all of the thought exchanges, and they're currently going. So thank you so much. We've had a lot of active participation in the one for this region, and it's really helpful. A lot of good questions that are coming through there. And then right now we're going through our public engagement. As you know, we were originally scheduled to meet with you all on the 16th. We thank you for your flexibility for the reschedule due to that inclement weather day. And so we're hosting these sessions where our staff are participating as well in the thought exchanges and have been invited to do that. And I think several of them are on the call here tonight as well. Once we get to the point where we're ready, we will share specific recommendations with the board, and those recommendations we will take to the board on April 14th. It'll start as an initial set of recommendations at the facilities committee meeting. We'll do another round of community engagement, and then we'll bring final recommendations to the board on May 5th. They have indicated they would prefer to at least have one more board meeting to make a decision. So in all likelihood, they probably won't take up a vote on the particular recommendations until May 19th. So we've got a little bit of time before the board makes a final decision. And I think that's where we're at. Once the decisions are made, then of course we'll be supporting the schools as they prepare for any changes. We'll also be looking to see if there's any feeder pattern alignments that need to be made, assignment plan to support the change that may need to be considered for the 27-28 planning cycle. And I think I'm going to take a sip of water and turn things over to Melissa.
Thank you. That was a lot of information. And now we would like to address as many of your questions as possible. So please take a few minutes and post questions and comments using the Q&A feature. As you continue to post questions, we will start addressing those that were submitted already during this session. We have quite a few queued up. As a reminder, please also continue to contribute to our thought exchange. This is another meaningful way to engage in the discussion, and we will be utilizing those comments in our feedback submittal to the Board of Education at the Facilities Committee meeting on the 14th. With that, Susan, are you ready for questions?
I sure am.
Okay. So let's start with kind of a basic question, simple question. What qualifies a school as underutilized? I think this has already been answered, but.
Yes. So right now what we're looking at is we start with a lens of under 85% utilization, because at that point we start to see inefficiencies in staffing and programming, and it's a school building that clearly has space to take on more students. So right now we're using anybody at or below 85% as our current lens to look at.
Hey, here's another one, also understanding what it means to be underutilized. Would underutilized schools become overflow schools?
So it's an interesting question, and I'd like to rephrase it a little bit in the sense that The district's goal is not to use capping as a long-term solution for crowding. So if a school needs to be capped, our goal really is to only use that for a couple of years while we find a long-term solution. So is it possible that for a period of time, a school that's underutilized could be identified as an overflow school for a school in the area that needs that support? Certainly, but we wouldn't want to have that be our long-term or long-range strategy. So our long-range strategy would be, how can we relieve the crowding at that cap school? And maybe that overflow school becomes an option for a boundary change to absorb some of that growth. So the short answer is, on occasion, yes, that might be, but that's not an intended long-range solution to that challenge in that community. We really like for people to know for sure, if I move into this address and that's my base school, I can go there. We prefer for families to have that assurance.
Why would you want to change schools that have high ratings? Specifically, Holly Grove Elementary is 8 out of 10 and Holly Grove Middle is 10 out of 10.
Amazing. Yes, that's a question that we get asked a lot, particularly when we're having this conversation. And please know, I think I said this in the opening, we fully, wholeheartedly understand as a team and as a staff that changing the calendar of your school is, for the most part, probably what nobody would prefer. Right? The vast majority of people would probably prefer to keep their schools operating on the calendars that they're operating on and to be able to make it work. So we're not looking to attack or pick on or, highlight schools that we think it's not arbitrary. What we're really looking at is, from a financial stewards of taxpayer resources, what's the best utilization for those dollars and how can we make those dollars serve students the best. And what we're finding more and more often, especially at the middle school level, is that the more that a principal has to get creative with figuring out a staffing plan at an underutilized multi-track year-round school, the more programs are restricted. You might have math classes that are kind of like 40 students. That's not an ideal number of students in a math class. You might have teachers that are having to teach 2 disciplines versus specializing in a single core subject to try to meet the needs of students on a low enrollment track. So we're finding that there are some programming challenges. In some areas, we've heard that because they don't earn enough teachers with their natural enrollment, they might have to hire substitutes for as many as 3 weeks at a time to cover specials or electives to ensure that there's still an adult in the classroom with the students, but you don't have that high quality teacher in front of the students. So by having all of the students on a single track or a traditional calendar, that lets the principal take all of those resources and sort of stretch them and move them and improve the academic programming that's available for students. So the only reason we're even considering this is because we want to really acknowledge that there could be improvements in what is delivered to students if we're able to get all of the students on a single track.
Okay, next question. Why would the change happen 2 years from now and not 1 year from now? And is it possible that these schools may not change their calendars at all?
So 2 questions. Okay. So I'm going to answer the second question first. Yes, it's possible, right? Right now, we're still in the early planning phases. We're taking the feedback. We're trying to see if there's any unique experiences or unique perspectives that maybe the planning team can't consider without your help, that might change what the recommendation would be. So yes, there is a possibility that there would not be a recommended change. Then the question about the timing of it, a couple of years ago, the board expressed that they really wanted families and staff to have a full 12-month or more cycle to plan and prepare for any type of calendar change. So if they approve it now and it takes effect for, let's say, the 26-27 school year, well, goodness, that would only give everybody about 4 or 5 months to reconfigure all of their plans and figure out how they're going to deal with their salary changes, their payment cycle changes, and of course, families and trackouts and maybe vacations that have already been planned. If we go to the 27-28 school year, that gives us a little bit more time, and it is technically doable. We have done that. We have done a 1-year notice and allowed families and school staff to have that 1 full year to be able to prepare for it. It's better than 4 or 5 months. However, the board really feels like it's ideal if we give you a 2-year runway. That way it gives you time to really consider the impacts on your family. It allows more students to, complete their school experience at the school before the calendar changes in effect. And it gives staff and principals plenty of time to think about how they'll reconfigure and restructure their school. If there is a need to go earlier than 28, 29, I have seen the board approve it on a shorter time schedule, but I certainly would not expect them at all to make any recommendations for 26, 27.
Okay, great. Thank you. There was another question related to that as well. So I think we've captured those.
Okay.
How do you determine which change will happen? Specifically with Holly Ridge Elementary, which is traditional, less than a mile away from Holly Ridge Elementary, which is traditional, less than a mile away from Holly Springs Elementary. Would single track 4 be the preferred conversion for Holly Springs Elementary?
So I'll do the operational efficiency, like the standard answer. If my assistant superintendent was in the room, he'd say, look, we should probably just, as staff, recommend traditional because it puts everybody on the same calendar. It creates those efficiencies across the district. It, normalizes things. However, we have learned over the last couple of years that there are some specific unique perspectives, like what you just mentioned. There's schools all around us that are traditional. We're very accustomed to a multi-track schedule. So a track 4 might ease that transition and still create that sort of differentness between our schools. Last year, the board was asked to consider 2 elementary schools, North Forest Pines and Pleasant Union, and whether or not they should go from multi-track to traditional. And ultimately, the board went with track 4. So I think that is definitely on the table for particularly a school that's not co-located with another campus, right? You have a little bit more flexibility there. So the feedback that you're providing will certainly inform the planning team before they make a final recommendation either way.
Okay, next we're going to talk about new schools. There are a couple questions that are related. First is, why did Rex Road Elementary open if that's now causing nearby schools to be underutilized? And then related, if you could talk about how opening new schools is considered, the conversations around opening new schools, and determining if that is a primary factor that's leading to lower capacity and utilization.
So I'm going to back that question up a little bit too. It's been made clear to me that some communities, like Holly Springs in particular, have had a lot of schools that have opened as multi-track year-round and have only known a multi-track year-round sort of scenario for the last probably getting close to 20 plus years. And so it's become what you all would consider as the norm for your community, and that completely makes sense. As a district, go back 20 years ago, when multi-track year-round was introduced, it really was intended to be a temporary solution to rapid growth. The challenge that we didn't mention in any of our timelines is between sort of the 2000-2001 time period and now, in the middle of all of that, there was a class size legislation change. And that class size legislation change essentially, Melissa, I'm going to get this wrong. It's a little over 9,000 seats that we lost at the elementary level. Because we had to change how many students we were serving in kindergarten, first, second, and third grade per classroom. Had to reduce it from 22 or 24 down to the 18, 16, the 17, or the 17. So at that time, multi-track year-round had to be used even longer than was originally intended. Originally, it was to try to bridge the gap between the growth and when the new schools could come online. No one really considered, I don't think at that time, that multi-track would persist as long as it has. I think the community really thought that multi-track would be used for that bridge period, and then we would revert the schools back to a traditional calendar. And now we enter in 20 some odd years later where we're like, wait a minute, almost half the history of our district, we've been operating multi-track year-round schools. So I think as a district, we would love it if all of our schools could be on the same calendar, right? We think that would be great for the district, great for the communities, great for families to have really predictable schedules. But we're starting to realize, based on unique perspectives from our communities, maybe that's not what our communities want. So what we're really looking at here is whether or not multi-track is needed for capacity purposes anymore, because that's really what we use multi-track for as a district. It's truly to get capacity in a school. So while these schools are underutilized, they're underutilized because they're multi-track. If they weren't multi-track, they would be more appropriately utilized. They would be fitting in their space. And so that's where we're at, just trying to be good stewards of taxpayer resources. Rex Road was brought online because at the time and inception of that capital improvement plan that sort of added that school on, I want to say the planning for that was probably before COVID even hit. And once a project like that is running down the road, we've got to keep moving forward. The growth will come in this region over time. This is the last school on that edge of the county. So any growth that's coming into that area will eventually fill this school. But perhaps we were a little bit fortunate in this one instance where the school has actually come ahead of all of the growth. So the growth will come and the school will be fully utilized. It just might not fill as quickly as we originally thought it would.
Thank you, Susan. Next question. Have you looked at approved new housing communities that are going to be established within the next few years and the impact of the potential new students on enrollment?
Yes, thank you for asking that question. I'm going to take you back to the projected enrollment slide. Where was that? Was it here? There we go. So yes, we work with our municipal partners, and Holly Springs is an amazing partner in particular, but all of our towns are. And they help us evaluate and assess what's going on with the current approved construction plans, what's on the docket, what's getting, pending, what's being looked at. And we take all of that information and share that with our third party, UNC Demography, that helps us to analyze that information and think about student generation. And so, yes, we have definitely collaborated with them on that effort. And you'll see that what is happening is that the area kind of in this portion of Holly Springs is really starting to slow down. Yes, there are new residential developments coming and there is some growth coming. However, some of it is equal to, you see here, it's kind of a balance. We're going to get some new residential development, but it's going to take the place of an area that used to grow. So we're going to see some stabilization there. It may be some backfilling as in place. We are continuing to monitor that. In addition, we're starting to see many municipalities, and I believe Holly Springs is one, and Melissa, correct me if I'm wrong, that are also considering adding to their residential portfolio senior housing. And so there are some developments, while they might be somewhat substantial in size, will generate very few students. That's a new thing that we're starting to see happen in many communities around the county. But yes, we do work with your town planners as a wonderful partner, and they really help us to think through these recommendations. And so yes, there's still some growth projected. It's just not all in this little corridor here where we, have some schools that could potentially benefit from an improved efficiency by having a single track.
Okay, let me get into a few different kinds of questions here. If Holly Springs Elementary has 14 trailers, is removing trailers a higher priority to keep on year-round instead of converting to a traditional calendar?
That's an amazing question. I'm glad you brought it up. That is something that the planning team has been weighing and considering and talking, with the principal about how space is utilized. So yes, we mentioned that removing trailers is a way that we can improve efficiency at a school. So absolutely, that type of conversation is on the table. That's why we said no specific recommendation has been made for calendar changes yet, as we're still trying to weigh and consider what's the best approach moving forward.
Here's another one. Has any thought been given to the economic impact this would have on local businesses?
I've seen that come up in the thought exchange for this area, and it was a unique perspective that we've not really heard from other communities. So that is definitely something that we need to take back to the planning team and maybe talk with the town planners about more. If I understand this question correctly, it's really about a business industry that sort of established itself by providing track out care. And if those track outs are no longer in place, will those businesses continue to thrive? So definitely that is something to consider and weigh in this decision-making process. And it is a unique perspective that this community has brought forward. So I am thankful for that insight.
Next is, I understand the growth in Holly Grove and the Holly Grove area has been considered. How much growth at Holly Grove Middle is projected with the new developments? There are several hundred homes planned potentially.
We're continuing to evaluate that. Right now, it looks like whatever that growth might be would easily be supported by a single track or a traditional calendar at the school because it has so much available space. Again, it's only operating around 60% at the multi-track. If we were to convert that to traditional, did we have that number on the slide, Melissa, what the traditional capacity would be?
I believe we do.
Is it here? Whoops, hang on. Pardon me if I'm making you dizzy. Close your eyes. Yes, we showed that Holly Grove Middle would still only be at 76% if it were to convert to a traditional or track 4 calendar, meaning it has sufficient space to absorb whatever that growth might be.
Would dropping a track be considered first versus changing the school's calendar?
That's an excellent question. Some schools have already started to do that. And so that's usually a sign that the school is going to end up in some financially difficult positions. When schools start dropping, let's say track 2, or in your area, I think track 2 is very popular, and maybe track 3 would be the track to drop. What we're noticing is that that's when we get in situations in particular where we're trying to figure out how to have a specialist be available across the 3 tracks, because we can't necessarily afford to have a full 12-month employee to serve all of the tracks. And maybe a substitute has to come in and provide coverage when that 10-month employee is, not available to serve the other tracks. So it can get very, very difficult to provide high quality programming across the 3 tracks if the enrollment isn't just right. And it really does put a burden on the principal to make sure that all those services are available. It's just something to consider. And right now, we don't have a lot of additional resources as a district to be able to put toward that effort. On occasion, we might have to put extra months of employment in that principal's sort of allotment so that they can afford to hire that extra teacher, but then that takes away resources from another school. So it's a very delicate balance, but it is something that may happen in the next year as these schools continue to be a little bit under enrolled.
There are a couple of questions asking if the Apex Friendship Middle School base assignment area could be altered to send more students to Holly Grove Middle School.
That is an interesting perspective. I'll pull it here. So that's elementary. Hang on. Where did the middle school map go? Oh, it's not there yet. So if you zoom in here, Apex Friendship is here. This is, I believe, I can't remember which on top, 1 or 64. I think this is 64 and that's 1, or that's 64 and this is 1. But this is that major highway here that goes toward like Sanford. And there is a portion of the Apex Friendship Middle attendance area that's here, that's below that line, that's largely comprised of the Oakview Elementary base attendance area. So they're currently going Oakview Elementary, Apex Friendship Middle, and then going over to Felton Grove High. So is it possible that we can make a recommendation to take this portion and perhaps add it to Holly Grove Middle? Perhaps, but they do attend Oakview Elementary, which is operating on a traditional calendar. And even if we were to do that, I don't know that it would fill all of the capacity of the school, and I don't know that it would necessitate multi-track, but it is something that the planning team is evaluating and considering to determine whether or not Holly Grove could stay multi-track or whether or not it could operate traditional. There's a lot of things to consider there. And I'm not sure if it's come up, Melissa, but I do want to address the very unique perspective from the middle school side of things. One thing that we have heard when we're talking with administration and families, that middle school experience is uniquely different from elementary, is that at the middle school level, you start to have more after school clubs and activities, things like competitive teams, both athletic and academic. And when a student is tracked out and doesn't have bus service, then it's very difficult for them sometimes to get to campus to participate in those activities. They're left, to carpooling, having to rely on parents, maybe during working hours where perhaps they might normally be at work. And so we're seeing that there are some access and equity issues with our middle schools that are on multi-track year round, where some students have a really hard time participating in those after school activities because they're still happening even though they're tracked out. And so one thing we've been weighing and considering, and maybe your community could add some insight into, is whether or not middle schools really would function better on the traditional calendar. That way, any given day that the student might be participating in something after school, they would already be at school on campus because of that. Most of those activities still follow the traditional calendar. The athletic teams, some of the competitive academic teams, they seem to still follow a traditional calendar. So that's something that has sort of been brought forward this year as we think about middle school calendars. By way of example, Roseville Middle and Pine Hollow Middle were under enrolled multi-track year-round schools in the northern and eastern parts of the county. And ultimately, based on some of those types of considerations, the board did determine that they should operate on a traditional calendar. So just let us know through your comments and questions if you have any insight on that particular perspective.
And we have been hearing that quite a bit lately. All right, moving to a little bit of a related question. If we move to single track, can the community vote and choose which track we switch to, or must it be track 4?
You know what? It's a consideration that we hadn't, like, from an administrative perspective, because we think about buses and bus service and bus routes, and also trying to create predictable calendar alignment. And just historically, we've always gone to track 4. So that is a unique perspective that started to come up this year, and I think in the last planning cycle. So we will certainly take that to administration and our transportation team and academics and special programs and all of them to see what the impact of having a different single track might look like, because I think that is a unique opportunity for us to consider.
Okay, switching direction a little bit. By switching from multi-track to single track, how does that affect student ratios? Typically, how many classes per grade would there be and students per class?
So it's going to depend school by school, but generally speaking, by having all of the students on the same track, that then gives the principal flexibility to create more normalized, balanced classes. Because if one class is at 20 and one class is at 18, they could go ahead and make an adjustment and have them both be at 19. Or if one is 20 and one is 16, they could balance things out and have them both be 18. And you wouldn't have to change the operating calendar for that family. You would just simply move them to that classroom to the left or to the right. In addition, as the year goes on, if there are some academic concerns or some behavioral concerns where maybe having the student be in a different cohort or mixing with different students would be beneficial, if everyone's on the same calendar, it makes those types of adjustments that support students in learning a little bit easier as well. Because when you have a single track, let's say track 2, there's no other classroom that student could, mix and mingle with, because they're the only students on track 2 in that particular grade level. So the class size ratios tend to balance out and normalize, and they tend to then adhere a little bit closer to what the ratios are for the district versus being very disproportionate. So they'll still adhere to the ratios, this 18, 16, 17, and 17. Those are state mandated, so they'll adhere to those ratios. But you'll see that they're more balanced across all of the classes in that particular grade level versus having those imbalances that you might have with the multi-track.
Okay, thank you. If multi-track year-round schools move to a traditional calendar, would families have the opportunity to transfer to another year-round school?
That is a great question, and we get that a lot. So that is something that the planning team would need to consider in terms of what types of flexibility might be available based on seats in the area. Well, I can say certainly we would love to try to help families with that, and we did that in one community last year where there was an option. The question will just be if there's sufficient capacity at that other school to absorb all the students that might request it. But yes, there are some special provisions we certainly could make that would allow families to request a transfer to a multi-track year-round school in the area that's still operating on multi-track. I just want to be careful not to say that it's a guarantee or a promise until we get closer to actual recommendations, because it'll depend on the school and the site and the total number of students interested.
Are the mobile classrooms the same as trailers on each campus?
Thank you for that question. Yes, we use the term mobile classroom to talk about any type of classroom that's not part of the structure of the school. So most people will call them trailers, but there are some that are single individual trailers, and sometimes there's 6 or 8 classroom sort of pods or units. So for us, everything in that bucket is a mobile classroom, and then we have the pods and we have the individual trailer units. So yes, anything that maybe you might personally think of as a trailer, some people call them cottages or villages. We all have unique names for them on each of our campuses, but yes, that term mobile classroom refers to any one of the classrooms that are temporary and have a hitch on them, and we can move them off site. So those would all be in that category. Yes.
There is a question that says, will trailers be removed from Holly Grove Middle? But there are not currently trailers in Holly Grove Middle.
I think the elementary school has a few. So if you're looking, you might think they're associated with the middle school, but and I think the high school might have some too. And since all 3 of them are on the same campus, it might be hard to tell whose is whose.
Then there's a question coming from staff, potentially. Is there a plan to support 12-month employees?
Yes. So if we get to the point where a specific recommendation is made and 12-month employees are impacted, we will then have a whole separate session just with staff. Our assistant superintendent and some people from HR will come out and talk to you about all the ins and outs of that. But I'll make sure that we have that question ready if we get to the point where a recommendation is made. But yes, there are some supports that are offered and some transition plans that are prepared to help staff that might find themselves in that situation.
Here's another trailer related question. How long would it take to remove unused trailers from the campus, specifically the Holly Grove Elementary campus?
I'm gonna ask you, Melissa. I'm not sure. It takes time for planning. We have to identify the funding. We have to do competitive bids and get someone to do a successful bid. And then we have to have a place for them to go or a demolition plan, right?
Yes, and I believe there's some also involvement with asset management and potentially purchasing. It's a multi-step process that's managed by our design and construction team, and I believe would take anywhere from 6 to 12 months once approved.
Once approved. Okay. So we have to get through the approval. So I would say all top to bottom, it could be kind of 18 to 24 months from declaring that they're ready to go to actually seeing them move off.
It sounds reasonable to me.
Yeah. We wish it was faster.
Let's see. Could you speak more to the information on slide 33?
Ooh.
It looks as though Holly Grove Elementary were to switch to single track or traditional, then enrollment would be at 112%.
Right. And that's if they were to switch today, but because they have declining projected enrollment, that 760 number is going to continue to get smaller as the 4th and 5th graders age forward. So that number will be much more in line with the capacity of the structure in the next, by 28, 29, when those students have all aged out. But yes, you're right. That's why we can't do it today. There wouldn't be sufficient capacity to support it. But as that 4th and 5th grade cohort, because they're just so much larger than the K-3 group that's remaining in the school, it'll significantly reduce the enrollment over the next couple of years. But you're good catch.
Will going from year-round multi-track to single track allow for TAs in the 2nd grade?
Oh, that is a question. I don't know. That's a very specific allotment type question. If you immediately want to know, I would suggest you ask your principal because they know that type of stuff a little bit better than we do, but we certainly will take it to the budget team and get an answer for that before we have any kind of staffing conversations. Thank you for that.
Just looking through some more of the questions. You shared a chart comparing utilization with and without trailers. is there a chart available that compares utilization with multi-track versus single track? And I think that's all on the same.
And I'm not sure that I
slide.
pointed that out clearly when I talked about it. So we'll just bring it back to this one at the elementary. Actually, all 4 schools are listed here that we're talking about. So the columns here are the potential traditional with that current enrollment. So if you look at this number here, most of them have a projected, Rex Road will have a slightly higher projected enrollment for next year because it's a growing school, but the others will have a slightly smaller, or Holly Grove might be maintaining.
Related to that, would the conversion make it necessary to cap any of these schools?
Oh, if that were the case, we wouldn't do it. So if the numbers start to look and trend in that direction that we might have to cap a school after we convert the calendar, then that would slow the process, because then we'd be back into that space where the projected growth would actually warrant leaving the school alone and letting it fill up. So thank you for that question. The district and the board has been clear over the last several years. We really want to move away from using capping as a longer range strategy. We really only want to use it for a couple of years versus for 10 or 15 years, which I know we've had to do in the past.
Will the district work to consider the least disruptive changes to address underutilization first before considering the most disruptive?
Yes. So yes, and that's part of this ongoing dialogue. Based on the planning team's review, it looks as if there's not sufficient projected growth, but we'll continue to review the data and look at the new information that came with the new forecast. It appears that nearby schools are doing okay and don't need to have their boundaries adjusted or reduced, but we'll continue to monitor that and see if that might be another approach we could use. Several of you have brought up mobile units. We will continue to assess whether or not removing the mobile units would get us that operational efficiency as well as better utilization rates for the school. And then calendar optimization would be that last sort of strategy that we would recommend. So yes, we're continuing to evaluate all of the tools in the toolbox and would only move forward with a recommendation for a calendar change if all of the data and evidence indicated that that was the best solution.
There was a question that asked, how is the Rex Road 5-year enrollment change listed as NA, not applicable? And that's just because that was looking back at the past 5 years, correct?
Yes. Where was that? Was that this slide? Oh, I think that was that same slide. Right here.
There it is. Yeah.
Because the school has only been open for a year, it has no 5-year trend yet. It doesn't even have a 1-year trend. So it won't have a trend for another couple of years.
I think you already answered this, but just to clarify, would there be a potential to submit a transfer for a year-round school nearby if our school gets changed?
That's always an option, and yes, but I think the nuance in this particular case, thinking about that earlier question, is how many seats are available nearby in multi-track year-round schools or even year-round schools, and how far could we go? Could it be a guarantee? Could it be a recommendation? Could it be as space is available? So those are some things that we'd really have to consider as we get closer to making any specific recommendations for the board to review. But yeah, that is very important to hear that that's an option that families would like to have so that we can make sure we consider that with the recommendations that are made. So right now I'm just stopping short of a guarantee or a promise, but yes, you can always ask for a transfer. The question is just how flexible can we be with approving them is probably the more important question for families to have an answer to. And we'll work on getting that answer as we go through the process.
What is Wake County Public Schools doing to provide stability?
Yeah, so stability here in this case would be having the students be able to stay assigned to their current school and have their current leadership and their current, teachers, as long as they would want to stay with their community. As much as we know that a lot of families and staff really love the calendars that they're on and would really prefer not to change the calendars, we also know that there's a strong community in a lot of these schools. And so while we can't foresee the future, we would certainly hope that the sense of community for the school would be the stability piece, being able to stay at your current school. But you're right, there is again, we said this was a more disruptive option in the toolkit, most disruptive option in the toolkit. So the stability there would be probably thinking about these potential transfers to other schools on the calendar, depending on what's important to you. Is the calendar stability important to you as a family, or is the school assignment stability important to you? And that way, if we can give you both options so you can choose for yourself, that would be ideal. And so we just want to continue reviewing that before we make any specific recommendations.
There are a couple of questions that are fairly specific. A couple of comments asking to bump this to 27, 28.
Okay.
If in May, Holly Springs Elementary is converted to traditional, do we get priority to change our assignment for this year to our number 2 choice year-round school or back to our original school?
Okay, so the first one, thank you again. I think we've heard a couple of comments about why do we have to wait all the way till 28 to 29. We'll definitely share that with the board as we're reporting out to say that say if you're going to make this decision, go ahead and make it and let's get it rolling for 27, 28. That's definitely, I will say, a unique perspective for this particular community. Thinking about the other question, what I'm presuming is that the student may be attending the school as a calendar application student, so that they put in a special request to go to the school for the calendar. And if that's the case, and I'm understanding the question correctly, what we have done in the past, and I would presume we would do for the situation here, if again we were to go forward with the recommendation, would be to allow those families who opted to go to the school for the calendar the choice to stay at the school. If they just build a community with the school and they want to stay with the school regardless of the calendar, or default back to their base assigned school, or they certainly could participate in any application process to ask for a different school for whatever reason. And in this case, it might be for calendar consistency. So I think all 3 options would be on the table. Again, I have to stop short of saying anything like a guarantee, just because we really need to see how many schools are being recommended, how many schools in the area have available seats, and what would be the impact on that volume of requests being received and approved. So we're not there yet, but we certainly will make sure we have those types of answers as we get closer to May. And again, right now we're only considering 28, 29, but it sounds like there's some energy. I don't know if there's a ton, but there's some energy about maybe advancing it to 27, 28. We'll see what we can do. 26, 27, I know 100% is off the table. That will not happen. Everyone is good for 26, 27.
I did see another comment pop up saying, please, not 27, 28, but there are several that had expressed interest in moving it up.
Okay. So we've got both sides of that.
A little bit.
Okay.
Are the traditional and single track calendars the default for the district unless crowding justifies multi-track year round?
Currently, yes, those are the 2 that we offer as traditional or track 4. The reason we do that, again, I think I mentioned it in this slide. What track 4 typically does for us is in a community that maybe doesn't need multi-track right now, but perhaps might need it 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years from now. Maybe going track 4 gives us that flexibility to keep the community in a year-round cycle, so that when and if that enrollment growth picks back up, we can easily sort of switch to all 4 tracks. Again, I think I gave an example earlier. Lake Myra is actually experiencing that going into the 26-27 school year. If we go to traditional, then that's the other calendar that we have available. And then that would just say we feel like we're good in this area. We feel like that moving forward with the traditional calendar could be a long-term solution. And it would really be us declaring that we don't think the school would need to go multi-track in the future. And so that's hard to say in an ever-growing and ever-changing district, but it would at least say that, hey, maybe 5, 10 years down the road, it really doesn't look like the capacity will be needed. So we might feel a little bit safer going with a more conservative traditional calendar.
When schools drop one track, like Rex and Holly Springs, is that a school decision or the county the district decision?
So when a multi-track year-round school is underutilized and they really can't keep all 4 tracks full, they'll start reaching out to the long-range planning team, and we'll have conversations about what's the best approach. What should we be thinking about? We need to think about the track loading at the middle school that they go into. We need to think about what it's going to do for families if we keep changing their tracks. We have a lot of stability discussions around it. Ultimately, it is a school-based decision, but it is a partnership discussion where we think through all of the logistics of what might happen to that school long-term before they make those decisions. But ultimately, yes, it's a site-based decision in partnership with the planning team.
What schools feed into Holly Grove Middle School, and what calendar type are they?
Holly Grove Middle has a number of schools that feed into it. Pardon me, sorry for making people dizzy. Buckhorn Creek, traditional calendar. Holly Grove, currently multi-track, but on this discussion list. Lincoln Heights, traditional. Rex Road, currently on this list for discussion and currently operating multi-track year-round.
How will this recording be shared? Will it be on the website under calendar conversion?
It's technically going to get posted to our WCPSS YouTube channel, and we'll put a link to it on that calendar conversion page, so you can get to it either way.
This question is asking, is there a way to understand if the style of learning through multi-track is more beneficial to students, particularly for neurodivergent and special education children?
So the research that was done here, I think, looked across all different subgroups, which would have included special education students and students that fall into the neurodivergent category, but don't quote me on that. Read it for yourself if you'd like to know more about it. But it was my understanding that all of the subgroups were included in the assessment. We do know that individual students and individual families see benefits of both traditional and multi-track year-round. In our office, through the transfer request process, we might hear a student say, my student has this particular condition, and because of it, having those track outs is really disruptive. Trying to get them back into their regular schedule is very challenging, and we really would prefer a traditional calendar. And then I'll have another family with that same diagnosis, but for their student, it's a little bit different. Gosh, those track outs provide a really good break for my student. They allow them to reset and regroup, and they can come into their new track refreshed. So we do recognize that those diagnoses themselves aren't indicating what that particular individual student needs, and that's why that individual student transfer process still exists, is so that for those unique individual personal hardship concerns, those things can be evaluated. But as far as I understand from the research that was done, it looked at all the different subgroups of students across all the different categories that we have, and that performance was relatively even between traditional or multi-track, because it's really about the number of days of instruction and not so much the breaks. It's an interesting and fascinating. I don't know that I would have predicted that, but it was actually surprising results when we heard them. Melissa, I'm going to just we're at 7:27. There are a ton. Are there a ton more questions we've missed, or?
There are a few more, but it is getting to be the end. We're going to answer questions on the FAQ, correct, that we couldn't get to?
Yeah, so if there's any questions we couldn't get to, or questions like that we're approached, we're like, oh, I'm not sure I know the answer to that. We're going to use all of this information to update the FAQ portion of our website. And I think we're going to actively be doing that over the next couple of weeks. So again, bookmark that website. I'm not sure, did I put that on here? Where did I put that website? If you want to bookmark this website, that way you can just get straight into this conversation. You can get to that exact same website by clicking on step 6 on this other one. They're cross-linked. But if you just want to bookmark calendar conversion, if you don't care about the projections and you don't care about the growth and the capital improvement plan, and you really just want to focus on this conversation, you can click here. There are a handful of FAQs that have already been posted in response to questions about carpool and some of the questions we even addressed here today. And then that's the same place where we will drop the link to the YouTube recording when we're done. So I think that answers that question. The only question I'm not sure we've heard that I think is germane to this particular discussion is about the fact that Holly Grove Elementary and Holly Grove Middle are co-located on the same campus and what would happen with those calendars. Historically, we've tried to keep schools that are on the same campus on the same calendar. So last year, we tried to open Bowling Road Elementary as multi-track, and it's on the same campus as Fuquay-Varina Middle, which is traditional, and the board really just didn't feel comfortable with that and ultimately opened it as a traditional calendar school. I'm not saying that that will continue to move forward. If it makes sense for the elementary school to remain multi-track and for the middle school to be traditional, I could see that maybe being a possibility one day, but I certainly don't think the other would happen. I don't think we would ever say make the elementary school traditional and make the middle school multi-track. I don't think that would ever happen. I would think in this community, especially because Holly Grove Elementary, Holly Grove Middle, and Holly Springs High are all on the same campus, that maybe allowing some K-12 calendar alignment for those families might be beneficial, but it'll be interesting to see what the thought exchange shows.
Thank you, Susan. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. We hope this session has been informative and that you better understand the process used to determine which schools may benefit from a change in school calendar. We appreciate your open and honest participation. Your input and feedback is vital to our planning process and will be used as the planners develop official recommendations. Remember, we will present a summary of this feedback received and any recommended calendar changes to the board at their facilities committee meeting on April 14th, with a final vote expected in May. The thought exchange will remain open through April 5th. We encourage you to continue to post comments, rate comments, and explore the exchange. Please also continue to monitor your email and district website for information about upcoming events and updates to the FAQ section on the calendar change and enrollment plan pages. Again, thank you, and we hope you enjoy the remainder of your evening.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.